Mark, when you got started, what was the opening that you saw in the market?
Yeah, I'll probably approach this a little bit differently than maybe I think most founders, which is when we were in the beginning, we knew the problem pretty well because our background between Conway, myself, and Hubert, we used to manage commissions in a prior life, and so one of the things that was really important to us was we wanted to build a solution that we would have used. And if you take us back to that journey, we didn't have this vision of we're going to build this multi-billion-dollar company and sell products all around the world. We had this very, very simple goal, and it might be laughable now, but it's just like, let's just get one customer. And if we can get them happy, we feel like we would have achieved our objective on something that was really important for us. So I remember 4 years ago, it was let's build the product that we would have used. Let's take all those learnings and try to codify it. And so that was the start of Captivate IQ. Now, I think the fun thing that we could probably share a little bit more in our conversation is that first iteration is not the product that we currently have today. I think even though we come from the problem, which was very helpful, I think there's an important lesson of continue to be iterative, continue to be dynamic. So today we are on version 3 of that product vision, which I think is pretty telling in how we had to challenge ourselves to be responsive to what we've been learning when we interact with customers.
So, what was the version one? And then walk us through the version two and three, and what type of signals and data and whatever went into it decision making did you use to come to those?
Yeah, so version 1 was based on this concept of SQL. So, for people who are in tech, everyone's probably gonna be familiar with SQL. Um, and, the vision we had was everyone has a data science team. And one of the challenges was how do you get for commissions to be dynamic enough, or for your commissions platform to be dynamic enough to serve any type of commissions plan that you see at a company? How do you respond to that in a way that with your platform to enable people to do that easily and allow it to be flexible to be as accommodating? And so we believed at the time SQL was super ubiquitous, and it would enable companies to be that dynamic, and you can leverage an in-house framework, aka like a lot of data science engineering teams would know SQL, so that you wouldn't have this heavy lift of learning the product or learning a coding language. The challenge that we had at the time was obviously that's very isolated to tech, and if we believe we wanted to go after a much bigger opportunity, we need to make this more dynamic. So we shifted to version 2, and that was when we started our Y Combinator journey with this notion of what if we could build building blocks? And if you believe commission plans are really a construct of a series of building blocks that you can stitch together and then maybe leverage with other, if you had a library of building blocks, every company can take these building blocks and reassemble their commission plan. So that worked out really great up until it didn't. And one of the challenges that we learned was that to take these building blocks, they're highly custom, oftentimes so custom to the company itself. And you require engineering resources in the back end to be able to assemble these building blocks for these companies. So basically, think of it as for every onboarding, we would have a business analyst and we'd have an engineer, which is not really scalable from a unit economic perspective. So we challenged ourselves once more, which was, what is the problem that we're trying to face here? Why do we have engineering resources to begin with? And the key thing that we learned was that data doesn't come in the form that you need it in. It's a classic problem within companies. So we we had this vision going back to our roots when we were managing this stuff in spreadsheets, which was we would get data out of a data system and then we would transform it. We would do these transformations within a spreadsheet, whether you're doing a join, whether you're doing a VLOOKUP, whether you're doing a pivot table. So what if we could take that and build on that, productize, that kind of transformation. Some people call it an ETLs. In the business user context, we're just doing transformations to get the data into the form that we needed it. So we really built on that, and that became the basis and the baseline for version 3 of our product, which is what we have today. And now you'll see throughout our product, we've taken that concept of transformations and just blown it out through everything, which is why we are the most flexible solution in the market. It's why we have been much more easier to use with that, spreadsheet-like in syntax and Excel-like syntax, but also being able to be dynamic, bringing a lot of these concepts that you normally see in spreadsheets or in SQL.
Were these changes in the evolution driven by the market and customer feedback, or was it your own vision, or what went into it?
I would say a lot of it was, to be honest, I think a lot of it was us challenging ourselves, knowing that, I think maybe as a quick background, Conway and I in particular, we have much more of a finance background. So by default, we have this knack for extrapolating. What does this look like at scale? What does this look like with 10, 100, 200, 1,000 customers? And so everything that we always did was, YC teaches you to, or Y Combinator teaches you to do things that don't scale. And that's very true to kind of learn everything, but eventually you need to do things that do scale. So while some of it was driven by the market, like for example, it has to be easy to use, it has to be very flexible, and those are table stakes. If you can't do anything or you can't have a commissions platform if 1 year it works and then they update the commission plans and it doesn't work and the software can't accommodate it. Like that's silly, right? So there's feedback like that I think we took to heart. But at the end of the day, I think we knew that we need to build a business. We need to build an enduring company. We needed to build something that would scale. And so I remember, I think the one key lesson that we had, and something that we talk about a lot, especially internally, is sometimes you'll hit a fork in the road, and it's a really tough decision. It's a fork in the road for the company, the direction. And earlier on, you're challenging all your beliefs, like, hey, is this even a good idea? And so for us, version 2 was that fork in the road. We asked ourselves, like, it is fact, if we continue with version 2, we will not be a company. Sure, we have investor money. We just closed a seed round. But fast forward a year, we're going to burn all this money, and we're not going to have scalable unit economics. No one's going to want to invest or be a supporter of this company. It's just not going to exist. So you look at that, and you're like, how do we make the hard decision? What is the right decision there? And the right decision was to figure out a way to make this more scalable.
Once you got your first customer, obviously it wasn't game over. What did you do marketing sales wise to get your first million?
Yeah, so some people might laugh at this, and our investors who might be listening to this might chuckle. We had a very weird problem, which was we did not do a lot on the marketing side in the early days, probably to a fault. If you look at our website, you'll probably see, like, if you especially see the earlier iterations of it, like, wow, like it is a very different website that was not designed with a marketer in mind. And that I take blame for that. Like, I was leading that effort. So, if you look at my background, I don't have a marketing background by design. So in the early days, what we did was there was one point in time where I remember our VP of sales, Christian Borelli, and I were chatting about, at the time you're doing founder selling, and then you have another colleague that's selling with you. And at the time you're doing full cycle sales. Everyone is selling. And for us, the funny joke internally was that we were full cycle sales and we were implementing our own products. So we were actually taking on quite a bit of work ourselves. So the story that I remember, and I think it's pretty important, is it's important to do that because you need to get familiar with the motions. You need to get familiar with what's working and adjust, but also just internalize a lot of the things that are going on within the company, the product, how people are responding, messaging, etc. When you have a foundation of that, it doesn't mean it needs to be perfect. Then you start to pull apart this, I don't know if you want to call it a funnel or call it the motion itself. you start to look at it and say, like, what can we operationalize or start operationalizing? And Christian and I had this long debate, like, hey, I think it's time to bring in BDRs. And when you're early as a start, you're like, oh man, we need to invest more people. Like, are we ready? But we looked at the math, and you're like, yeah, it makes sense. It's a no regret move to start investing in BDRs to take apart one part of our motion of our sales cycle and operationalize it. Get people who are better at it to improve that process, streamline it, and really drive that. So the BDR motion was where we started first. It worked out very, very, very well, almost to a comical fault, not really a fault, but comical, inbound versus outbound. It was the lion's share of how we drove the business earlier on. And from our investors who saw their portfolio companies drive a lot more inbound versus outbound, we were doing the opposite, and we just kept doubling down. And so today, like, it's still a very important part of our motion. It's very successful, and we're now continuing to do a little bit more broadly on the marketing side. But I think the key lesson here is if you find something that's working, it's very important to double down on it. Like, listen to it, think about it. Don't like pull back on it, but do it cautiously and thoughtfully. But it's a big lesson, especially in the early days.
How big of a part of your revenue today is outbound versus inbound?
So it's historically, if you look the last 2 years, it used to be about 70-30. Last year, I think it was about getting up to 60-40. This year, we're targeting to be more 50-50. I think over time, we'll see marketing shift to be much more of a heavier mix of that, just because by design, a lot of stuff is more organic. There should be much more reach more broadly, especially from verticals or segmentations or geographically. But today it is still heavier outbound with a path towards getting more half-half.
On the inbound front, what are you guys doing? Besides more word of mouth, are you guys doing content, or what's happening?
Yeah, so great question. So we started building our marketing team probably over the last 18 months or so, maybe 2 years at this point. Actually, yeah, beginning of COVID, you can almost say it's the beginning of when we started building out the marketing team. So 2 years now. And, I think what we've started on is it's just getting the awareness out for the brand. So we started on software review sites like G2, Capterra. My understanding is we're number one on a number of those, like Gartner's Peer Insights is a new one that came out that we've been focusing on, and I think we're number one on that one. Besides that, organic Google traffic has been a big focus for us, as well as paid. Our focus over this coming year is how do we build more organic through content, through providing really unique insights, around webinars, what are we learning, what are we seeing, and driving conversations there.
You guys are not the only game in town. So you have competition, some bigger, some smaller. How do you look at how do you think about differentiation and winning business? How do you stay competitive?
Yeah, I think this one is for us. We just go back to our core roots. I think what's really important for us is that going back to the earlier part of what we mentioned, like, we come from this problem, and to be honest, like, I don't know how many vendors out there that can really say that. In fact, a stat that we share internally is about 40% of our employee base comes from the problem, which is massive. We even have engineers that come from the industry, right? So a lot of people are very familiar with what we're doing, that problem, and so we all kind of internalize the same goal. That's really important because it helps on two things. One, it helps with obviously having subject matter, but it also helps with convictions around things that you think you want to challenge in how to tackle the problem. And one of the unique ways that we're tackling the problem is that a lot of vendors out there take much more of an object-oriented approach. This is very similar in design. If you're familiar with Salesforce is object-oriented, right? For us, we come from the problem, and what was really important for us was, again, being flexible, accommodating commission plan, but also that ease of use. A lot of roughly 70, 80% of the market comes from spreadsheets. So why is that, and why is that still like a very, very popular solution? Because it's super flexible, and because people know how to use it. You probably know how to use it. I know how to use it. A lot of people at our company knows how to use it. So what's wrong with it? It just doesn't scale very well, right? And that's why we had this problem in the beginning. Like spreadsheets does not scale when you have 100, 200, 1,000, 10,000 reps. So we've taken these elements and we've built what we believe is more like a modeling solution. We believe commission's a modeling exercise. In our opinion, we don't believe any other vendor has philosophically or built their product in the same way as that. So in itself, there's an inherent differentiation around how we've gone to market. What's great and can seemingly be scary is that we are kind of that lone wolf trying to approach that in that methodology. If you believe in this, is where coming from the problem helps a lot. If you have a lot of conviction around what you're doing and you're taking a different path, the only way you're going to get comfortable with it is that, hey, I've done this before. I know, like, going back to my old role or to all of our old roles, we feel like this is how we would have wanted to do this versus the alternative. And so I think that's probably the most fundamental piece around differentiation for us.
So if I'm, let's say a prospect for you, and so I'm looking at you guys, I'm looking at Spiff or Quarterpath or one of those players. Am I able to tell that difference from your like website when I get exposed to your messaging, your ads, or your content in general? Or how would I find out that you have like a structural difference behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and part of it is we're still improving our storytelling on our website and product marketing and messaging around that. But once you go into that first demo, you see our product, your first reaction, and I would say it's very noticeable. It does elicit this reaction. It's like, oh wow, it is. I get what you guys mean. It has a spreadsheet like interface in key parts. There is this modeling aspect. It brings in this Excel-like syntax. It's probably the number one thing that people notice and gravitate towards. And I'll be honest, there are some people out there where, and we can all think of that person, where when it comes to spreadsheets, they don't like them. There's people who, former sales reps that turned into sales ops or finance, and yeah, like you give them a spreadsheet and they're like, I'm scared of this stuff. Our belief is that that's not a significant portion of the market, especially if you're in a finance role. I think it'd be a little scary if you're in finance and you're scared of spreadsheets. Sales ops, I think there's a good amount of people who are very strategic in nature, and spreadsheets they live and die by. So, it is something that is very noticeable when you go into our product about how it works, and it's fundamentally, it'll look different and feel different than any other product.
Some of the differentiation and things, why choose you are like product related. Today in tech, there's a common belief that products are pretty easy to copy. So if the competitors are looking like, hey, customers want that, let's also build that. So how are you thinking about, 5-10 years into the future? Are you building any moats, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's two things that I have that I personally share as a belief around this. You're right, products are easy to copy, and you've seen this even on the big scale between features between like an iPhone and an Android phone. I think the one starting point is I do think it does come down to the leadership team and the company philosophies and what drives them. I say that because there is an element of culture around vision that will always hopefully give you that edge. You can't copy and you can't predict copying. You can only copy what's known, which takes time to assess and then assign a team to go literally copy. So you're always going to be factually behind. So if you really play that out, if done well, a company that is a category leader or that is super innovative and continues and has a culture around being innovative, they should by design always be ahead of the pack. And so our hope is that as a product focused and product led company, we can continue to have that as a key part of our DNA. Beyond that, I do think it comes down to, if you just broadly speaking, as a founder, you do have to keep thinking about the market and where is the market going, listening to your customers. I find it that it's very rare that a customer will say, "You got the best product. Please don't do anything more." Like, this is it. Don't do anything more. Don't add any more features. It just never works that way. Maybe it does, and maybe I haven't been familiar with that company. It's always been, there's always better things to do. There's always evolving things in the market. And more importantly, there's things that even customers don't see and don't know about that you will have to see and take, pattern recognition. Hey, here's where I think the industry is going in 3 to 5 years. And we can make this even better by maybe going into this adjacent market and providing a little bit broader of a platform. Or we believe this, how people are going to operate is going to be changing in 3 years. We're going to start building something around this that positions us in a way that is going to make our customers even more successful. I think if you keep thinking about those things, I think you will inherently have a competitive advantage.
What are you guys doing specifically to ensure that you guys are innovative and then you move fast, that you don't get stuck in bureaucracies and SOPs slowing you down like that happens to a lot of companies?
Yeah, for sure. So, big thing for us is, and this is, I think it's easier said than done. And I wouldn't say like we're perfect about it, but I do think it's really, really important to evangelize one, the mission and have a mission. I think that's a starting point because that gets people bought into the bigger problem. Why are we doing what we're doing and where do we want to go with this? I think the second step is to continue to iterate on where you think the company is going and where you think the industry is heading into. Those two things I think are going to be the biggest drivers in terms of staying innovative, staying ahead of the problem, and bringing it back to the company and laying out the trajectory of how you want to get there. Beyond that, I mean, as any tech company will say, it really does come down to the culture, but also, factually product and engineering, and continue to find really great talent who is bought into that mission, but also just continue to build out the teams and continue to accelerate on a broader vision with how you lay out the engineering structure, parallel processing, different product lines, product lanes, etc.
There are a bunch of players in your space. Why have you guys succeeded where some others haven't done? Now, looking back retroactively, what are some 3 to 5 things that you guys have done really well?
Yeah, I think I look back at the space, and the space is kind of just maybe as just a contextual point that people maybe on this call might not be aware of. This space is an older space. In fact, it's one of the older software spaces. It started back, in my opinion, it started back in the '90s with Trilogy Software. Trilogy, and I think a team left. They started Calidus. A team left from Calidus. They started Exactly. And so on and so forth. So there's kind of been this long lineage. You can almost tie it back to one company through a series of companies. Beyond that, there's been a longer tail of just smaller startups, and I think the challenge has been rooted in a couple of things. One, just talking to different industry experts who've been at all these companies. Why is it that there's so few? If you look at a grid of any different category, I'm sure you've seen this. There's like a million vendors, but if you look at commissions, there's actually not a lot of vendors. So why is that? It's a really, 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 really hard problem to solve. I think people, bluntly put, are kind of naive to the complexity of the problem. And I'll give you kind of just a taste of what I mean by that. You have companies, let's say you have 10 companies in front of us. Let's simplify it. They're all software companies and they're all using Salesforce, right? You'd imagine, hey, they should probably have all set up Salesforce the same way. That's not the case. I guarantee you 10 companies will approach building Salesforce 10 different ways, right? So that creates a problem. Your data structure is really different. Okay, cool. Well, that's part one. Part two, what about your commission plans? Back in the day, you had simpler commission plans, but nowadays it is much more, how do we build a commission plan that's right for us? Maybe we have a usage model, maybe we have a subscription model, etc. Maybe we really care about upfronts, maybe we care more about multi-years, maybe we care about just monthly MRR or just general MRR. So you start to get permutations of how business models change, and then commission plans reflect that. So what we're calling out is, in one sliver of a segment, you already have endless permutations for this stuff. So what ends up happening a lot of times is that people want to tackle this problem, and they try to tackle this with a standard approach that they think is going to solve a lot of things, or a lot of different commission plans, and it becomes a rude awakening. Wow, this is a really hard problem. This next customer we signed is doing this really differently than the previous customer. Everything about our product needs to be kind of thought differently to accommodate this other customer. So that's part one. Then the part two is, okay, what if you took it and just made it really custom? Well, then no one knows how to use it. And I think that's where the industry has come from. If you believe, where the other players came from, it's top end of the market, serving, top Fortune 100s, 250s, et cetera. Like Exactly's first customer or earliest customer was Salesforce, and just grew with that. And that's continued to be one of their largest customers. If you think about what that means, they, commission plans don't change as often as a smaller startup that's trying to be nimble. And so you can lean on big SIs like Accenture, Deloitte to make these changes at scale because you have the budget for it. You probably have a little bit longer of a cycle to roll these changes out. Maybe it's once every year, maybe it's once every 2 years. So the type of product that's needed is different. So where we have come into play, and I think where the industry is heading is, look, mid-market's much more dynamic. There's a lot of unique requirements. And I think the product we've had is this right balance of ease of use as well as super flexible. And I think, in my opinion, that's the keys to the game around this stuff.
Let's see. When you're thinking about the future, what are the bets you're making?
This one's a little bit trickier for us because there's a lot of permutations when we think about our product. So, just as a recap, our product is much more like a modeling solution, and there's a lot of exciting things that we think we can do with it, and tackle. Today, we are thinking pretty heavily about what that means and the implications of that, but it's not yet something that we have been discussing more openly yet. But I can say, at the very minimum, it is something that we are thinking heavily about, which is, what are, coming from the world of our users, which are in the finance world and sales ops world, and sometimes accounting, what are the challenges that relate to the commissions world that we believe we can tie that into a broader picture?
If a new competitor entered the space, what would they have to do to win? How would they kick your butt?
I think, man, this is an interesting question. If a new competitor entered the space, I think the biggest thing that they would have to do is, so if you go back to, what I believe are the core tenets or keys for this game, it's, you need to find this right balance of ease of use and flexibility. So it's a very meta point, but they would have to find a better mousetrap that indexes on these two dimensions better than what we have today. Why is that important? It comes down to a go-to-market motion. It comes down to user sophistication and their ability to pick up the product. It comes down to the customer's ability to continue to use this product when commission plans change. This year, next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or when a new admin comes in. So, absent of doing those things well, then you're making up for it. So maybe they are thinking about different dimensions, like they found a more scalable and effective service delivery model, but that's impossible. Like I don't know how you scale, um, throwing more people at a problem. That doesn't seem like a tech company or a software company. Maybe, yeah, that's probably how I think about it because I don't see any other way around it.
In general, so if we don't think about sales compensation, but building a B2B SaaS company, what are some pieces of advice you would have for fellow founders? Looking back at your journey, what pieces of wisdom would you pass on?
Yeah, there's a couple that even to this day, other founders or partners at these early stage companies imparted as like pattern recognition advice, and I think they're still core tenets of how we operate today. One, starting out, I think it's always a thoughtful approach to being open minded to problems, and in particular, I mentioned earlier about how Y Combinator, one of their core tenets is do things that don't scale. It really helps. It helps you think about like let's just get to this motion so we can fully understand the problem. So I think a founder will be smart to embrace that in order to really get a full 360 on how to get things going and then starting to operationalize those pieces. I think earlier on, we were very disciplined in a couple of ways. And so, imparting some advice around that. In the early days of a startup, it's very easy to see the shiny objects in the room around you. Maybe Salesforce reaches out to you and they want to talk about a BD relationship. Okay, um, that could be interesting, but that's another meeting, that's another time commitment that you have to take. So we were pretty disciplined around two dimensions that we thought were really important as a framework. One, will this help us acquire more customers, or will this help us build product faster? If it doesn't hit on these two things directly, we did not pay attention and we did not care. And I think that allowed us to be very focused and nimble around all the things that made it really important to focus in on. I think the third dimension that really helped, and this is something that I think plays into our backgrounds between Elise Conway and myself, and also now the broader executive team, we're very fortunate to have a finance or FP&A background. And I say that because even before we created the company, we had a budget. We've had a budget every year. We budget actually twice a year, as insane as it sounds. But if you think about a startup, like how do you make decisions? How do whether to do something or not? How do you know whether to invest or build out a new program? It's so much easier if you can have a model in front of you to look at the numbers and say, like, look, yeah, the ROI, it's a no regret move. That's one of our favorite things to think. It's like, wow, if we did this, like even in the worst case scenario, we're going to be up, and this is a smart move. So we've always tried to build that philosophy into a lot of things that we did. We have this belief that a lot of strategy can be solved by numbers. Planning out like, hey, what do we need to believe for this to be true? And if we believe these are reasonable assumptions, like, yeah, it's a no-brainer to do it. Or how do these things affect our unit economics and our storytelling? Oh wow, like this really does make it difficult, whether it's burn, whether it's magic number. Okay, maybe we have to be more pragmatic about what investments we need to focus in on. That started off, it sounds like that's something that you'd expect as a later stage company, but as crazy as it sounds, we started doing all of that in the early days, which made decision making a lot more black and white. I think the last thing I can impart that I think is just it's an important characteristic of how we think about our culture, and it's been rooted since the beginning, is there's a notion in product management called for being first principles. And I won't go into the long definition of it, but for us, we try to be have a first principles mindset around a lot of the how we operate, how we make decisions. I think it's easy for companies or leaders, especially when you bring in outside leaders, to be assumptive. Oh, I did this at another company, so it should be true here. That's very dangerous. It's really, really good to be first principles mindset, or have a first principles mindset, look at the problem, break it down to its basic building blocks, and really tackle what you believe. Well, get alignment, but really tackle on what you believe are the core problems and not core problems. It makes things a lot more black and white and much more clear when it comes to making the right decision at the end of the day. So those are the ones I can
Oh.
think of, at least top of mind. I think would be just if I was talking to a fellow founder, I think would be very helpful.